Well, hello folks, and welcome to another trawl through Mother's old back issues of Take a Break, Fate and Fortune, Britain's top supernatural monthly women's magazine. For those who haven't tuned in before, this magazine, people send in stories of their real life supernatural experiences, and they get about 150 quid. For it. And anyway, I read them out on here, and hopefully we can have a laugh, maybe. People always say, don't they, we need a laugh in these dark times, Jasper. It's actually quite sunny outside. Previously with these, I've tied them in with holidays. So we've had an Easter one, we did one at Christmas time. I was hoping to do one for Valentine's. I didn't have enough stories. Then we missed Pancake Day. At this rate, we'll miss the end of Ramadan. Are we kind of part way through Lent? Yeah, so it could be the Lent special. It's probably Pride Month in the world somewhere, isn't it? Right. So, but it's a bit different. I've got another story, another normal, proper ghost story to edit. This is just to tide you over until that. If you don't like it, give it a miss. Some people do. I find it fun. So let's see what we've got. Those who've listened to me do this before know that the high watermark, as it were, came very early on with the Phantom Flusher story. I know a lot of you also like the woman who was stalked by a squirrel. I thought that was a little bit mid, as the youngsters say. But let's have a look, see if there's anything worth reading in here. So how about this? I'll see you in my nightmare. Had I watched my boyfriend betraying me in a dream? And it's by Marissa Salvador. Marissa Salvador, aged 36. Suddenly, I won't do the voice. Suddenly, I woke with a jerk at 3 a.m. Come now, that's no way to talk about your partner, Marissa. I was drenched in sweat and fear. The images from my dream were fresh in my mind. Crunching metal, crashing car, bleeding boyfriend. There she goes again. You okay, hun? I knew I had to stop him from driving before it was too late. So she thinks she's had a warning. I scrawled a note about my premonition and put it on his windshield. Why didn't she just tell him? Well, that's weird, isn't it? Don't go out in the car, I begged in big letters. Don't be ridiculous, my fella texted when he saw it. An unusual relationship, the communicating by writing only. I could just imagine him rolling his eyes. But that night, he crashed his car. Just like in my dream. He survived, but our relationship didn't. Oh dear, I can imagine there was quite a bit of I told you so going on there, wasn't there? As the years went by, I was often haunted by terrifying dreams. One day I was having a row with my mum when I lost my rag. I stomped off to bed, but at 3 a.m. I woke up with my face stinging. I dreamt my dad had slapped me for upsetting Mum. I could still feel where his hand had been. Except my dad was dead. Wow. I didn't like having a sixth sense. I avoided scary films and ghost stories, never had my palm read for fun, but I did have a friend who was interested in clairvoyance. You're psychic, she told me. I don't want to know, I snapped. She's quite highly strung, isn't she, Marissa? She's like a tightly coiled spring, isn't she? Always ready to explode. She reminds me of, has anyone seen that film Taffin, with Pierce Brosnan, one of his early films? And in it, there's this scene, where he's supposed to be drunk, I think, and he does one of the most extraordinary line readings, I think, ever committed to film. Let me play it for you. It's only quick.
What goes on in this town is none of your business.
As long as I'm living here, it is.
Then maybe you shouldn't be living here!
Amazing that, isn't it? And that's like Marissa, always ready to kind of kick off about something. It's like someone's flipped a switch. She can turn on a sixpence, that one. Anyway, Marissa says, then I moved to London and went to work for a parcel delivery company. One day, we all went to the pub after work, and my boss, Stuart, bought me a drink. He was funny and flirty, and asked me on a proper date. Oh, honestly, I think he's my dream man, I sighed. 6 months later, he asked me to move in. Won't it be too much, living and working together? I said. Don't worry, darling, I've thought about that, he said. So I'm making you redundant. No, it doesn't really say that. It says, Stuart swept aside my worries with a kiss. You could never be too much for me, darling, he whispered. I can't get enough of you. Oh, sorry, listeners. As we grew close, I can't quit you. I just can't quit you. I just can't quit you, baby. I just can't quit you. As we grew close, I told him about the weird stuff that happened to me. How I sometimes saw the future in my sleep. How extraordinary, he laughed. Well, I have a little secret of my own. I can see into the future too. And do you know what I see? I see you and me growing old together and making each other happy every day for the rest of our lives, darling. But then one day I spotted a text on his phone. Uh-oh. It was some mystery woman asking to see him. Is that spotting a text or just reading it? I don't know. I didn't have to be psychic to see that it spelt trouble. Who's this? I said, raising my eyebrows. Stuart said she was his ex, and told me it was no big deal. She gets jealous sometimes, he muttered, and I just have to calm her down. How is he calming her down, I wonder?
If my pussy isn't attended to by 8 o'clock, I shall be stroking it for the rest of the evening.
Why does he have to keep his old girlfriend happy, I wondered, ignoring the blip on my spooky radar. Forget the clingy ex, I told myself. Trust the man you love. Besides, my family and closest friends were at home in Portugal. Stuart was my life now. After 2 years, we began making plans, talking about the future and where we would live. But I hadn't seen my family in a while and fancied a trip home. I wanted to catch up with friends and grab a bit of winter sun. It was going to be lovely. So, why was I feeling so uneasy about leaving? Stuart saw me dithering and asked what was wrong. I don't want to go, I blurted. But Stuart insisted I should go, and soon he was jollying me out of it by helping me pack and kissing me goodbye at the airport while looking at his watch. I'll pick you up when I get back, he winked. See? Red flag. He's a winker. We can all see that. Never trust a winker. Thanks, babe. I smiled, deciding I was being daft. My sister was waiting at the other end with a big hug. We had a wonderful time, catching up, and seeing my old friends was a tonic. Days whizzed by, and soon it was time to pack to go home. I was looking forward to seeing Stuart. I couldn't wait to run into his arms when I flew back the next day. Oh, good night, I yawned to my sister, heading for bed. Sleep tight, she said. I will, I said. Don't let the bedbugs bite, she said. I won't, I said. See you in the morning, she said. You too, I said. I'm just making it up now. Shall I get some kippers out of the freezer for breakfast? She said. No, you're all right, sir, I said. How about a nice muffin? She said. No, I think I'll just go straight to sleep. It doesn't say any of that. It says, I climbed under the covers and drifted off. But a shocking dream was waiting. Stuart was in it, and so was his ex, and I stood helplessly watching as they had shenanigans right in front of me. Good Lord. I woke with a jolt and lay in a cold sweat, struggling to breathe. I glanced at the clock. It was 3 a.m., and I had all the familiar signs of a paranormal panic attack. because my dream felt so real. As it grew light, the awful images wouldn't go away. I saw him cheating, I thought. Then I told myself I was being ridiculous. So I reached for my phone and jabbed Stuart's number. "Stuart, I had this awful dream," I wept, then told him all the sleazy details. "You were having shenanigans with your ex." But Stuart shrugged off my misery. "It was just a dream, funny face," he said. "It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything, didn't it?" I'd watched him swap texts with his needy ex. Sounds like a Taylor Swift song or something, doesn't it? What else were they swapping when I was 1,000 miles away? Oh, sorry, there it comes again. Stuart said we'd talk about it when he picked me up from the airport. "Don't bother," I huffed. Here she goes. I'll make my own way home. I'll make my own way home. Aboard the plane, this awful, tawdry, sordid dreamscape played on a loop all the way home. They must have had that new Snow White film as the in-flight movie. It was dark, so I took a taxi home, but something wasn't right. My car was where it had been, but Stuart's car was nowhere to be seen. Oh God, do you think Stuart's a ghost? I'm home. She imagined him. He was just a figment of her imagination. "I'm home. Where are you? Angry face," I texted. Stuart didn't answer, and I fell asleep exhausted. The next morning, there was still no sign of him. Blimey, this story goes on, doesn't it? Disturbing images from my dream flooded back, and my stomach twisted in a knot. That's the ice cubes, isn't it? They tell you don't drink the water when you go abroad, but people forget about the ice cubes. I knew Stuart had betrayed me, and he finally came home, looking all shifty. Yeah, I bet he did. "Did you have a good time, darling? Funny face? Did you have a good time, funny face?" he asked, bit too breezily. Yes, I glowered. "Oh, I had a good time, apart from my dream." He saw my face, and he knew I knew, and I knew that he knew I knew. He was shifting from foot to foot. He couldn't look me in the eyes. "Come on, out with it," I demanded. "What have you been up to?" Well, if the dream's anything to go by, up to is... well, no. He stared at the ground and admitted, just like in my dream, he'd slept with his ex. And before and after sleeping with her, they'd had shenanigans all over the place. "I knew it," I gasped. I had turned psychic in my sleep once again. He'd grabbed his chance to cheat while I was away, but thanks to my sixth sense, I'd seen it all. "Funny face, I've never done it before," Stuart whined. "It was only that one time. Well, 6 times with breaks in between." As if I'd believe him now. It turned out, when I refused to lift from the airport, he'd gone to another airport where his ex was arriving home from a trip. He took her home and they hopped into bed, just like my dirty, devastating dream foretold. Wait, so hang on. He didn't cheat on her until she'd told him about the dream. And if she'd had him pick her up from the airport, he wouldn't have done it. If you think about it, she almost planted the idea in his head, didn't she? Well, whatever. She'd had enough.
"Then maybe you shouldn't be living here!"
was what she said. So we split up, and I'm finding it hard to trust a man again. But I'm learning to trust my visions of the future. Stuart wasn't my dream man after all. He was just a love rat nightmare. And now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, there's 2 sides to every story like this, isn't there? What about Stuart? What does he have to say? Well, to their credit, because they're, as we've established on previous episodes of this, they're nothing but rigorous journalists. They've reached out to Stuart for his side of the story. It's only fair, isn't it? Give him his due. It's only fair he gets a right to reply. We've heard from Marissa. Let's hear from Stuart. So they've put a little footnote to the story, and it says, Stuart told Fate and Fortune, I never wanted to hurt her. Oh, that was good then. You love rat. So, what's next? What shall we have next? Goodbye. Goodbye, Mr. Ghost. There were strange goings-on in our home. Then an intruder appeared. How would we get him to leave? This is from Linda Townsend, aged 75. We were relaxing on the sofa, watching television, when in walked our cat, Billy. Hello, darling, I said. Hello, everyone, said Billy. He didn't really. Billy licked his paws and purred contentedly, meow, until suddenly his head jerked at something in the distance. He arched his back, his eyes widened, and the fur over his spine stood on end. It's like he's seen a ghost, I said to my husband, Philip. To be fair, that's fairly normal cat behaviour, isn't it? But no, according to Linda, it wasn't like Billy at all. A few nights later, with my 2 children tucked into bed, we settled in front of the television to watch our favourite TV drama series, Lovejoy, because we both enjoyed catching up with the continuing adventures of the lovable, roguish antiques dealer come detective played by Ian McShane over 6 series broadcast on the BBC between 1986 and 1994. Just then I heard creaking footsteps in the hallway. Thinking it was one of the kids up, Philip went to check. They know they must not disturb us during Mummy and Daddy's Lovejoy time, he rumbled. But no, they were both fast asleep. It must be the floorboards, I said. Well, I mean, obviously it was the floorboards. I mean, if there were footsteps, it was the boards that were creaking, wasn't it? Unless they've got creaky shoes. Our house was big and old, so it was bound to creak occasionally. We'd bought it from my sister Sue's friend. We'd bought it from my sister Sue's friend, and we'd been there 9 months before we started experiencing spooky goings-on. One night, my mum came for dinner while Philip was away. I'll wash up, she said, after piling plates by the sink, looking out of the window into our dark garden and stretching the bright yellow marigolds over her hands before plunging them into the hot, foamy tide, ready to begin a scrubbing and a rinsing the variegated crockery that still bore the remnants of the 3-course meal we had so recently enjoyed. I left her to it, when suddenly I heard a blood-curdling scream and rushed back in. What's happened? I said. I saw someone running towards the back door, Mum said. Someone's out there. I took a deep breath and went outside to investigate. After turning on all the lights and checking the whole perimeter of the house, there was no sign of anyone. But Mum was adamant. He was wearing a mustard yellow rain mac, and he had a sandy blonde buzz cut, and he was hurrying toward the door with his head ducked down, she said. It certainly spooked me. Mum had always been spiritual, and I'd grown up listening to her ghost sightings over the years. Oh, Mum. A few weeks later, when I met Sue for coffee, I told her about Mum's latest ghostly encounter, and as I finished, she turned white. Yellow rain mac, she said. Mustard yellow, I corrected. Blonde buzz cut, she said. Yes, I confirmed. Ducked down, she said. No, just normal human hair, I said. Hurrying, she said. Linda, that sounds just like the boy who used to live there. Here. That sounds just like the boy who used to live here. Oh my gosh. I listened rapt as Sue told me about her friend's son, who was called Michael, though everyone in the area knew him as Little Mustard Mac Blonde Buzzcut Boy. He'd loved our house, but had sadly died in his early 20s, just a year before we moved in. I felt completely rattled by what I'd heard, but I knew what I had to do. Late one night, I stood in the middle of Michael's room as my children slept soundly in their bunk beds. Feeling uncomfortable and a little silly, I spoke to Michael's ghost. "Michael, I want you to know you are always welcome here," I started. "This is your home and always will be. But please try not to scare the kids. I hope you understand." And after that, the strange incidents stopped and life returned to normal. There were no more noises at night, and the hair on my billy remained flat. Wonderful. Well, I just hope wherever Michael is, he's at peace. Goodness me, well, that's terrifying. Let's see what else we've got. This one. Hang on. This one is called Tarot of Terror. A deck of fortune-telling cards unleashed chaos on my poor family by Sean Gregory, aged 38, a youngster. Unpacking the shopping bags, my husband, Steve, took out carrots, pasta, tinfoil, corned beef, some drawing pins, custard, cheese, triangles, and a random pack of tarot cards. "Have you been up the middle aisle again?" I said. "Well, you asked for a treat," he replied. "Jesus Christ, Steve, she meant a galaxy bar or something, not a bloody pack of tarot cards, man, you useless great oaf." "Enjoy," he said. Steve. Leafing through the instruction booklet, I felt a spark of excitement. Ooh, maybe Steve wasn't barking up the wrong tree after all. Tonight could be the night. A spark of excitement, imagining myself giving readings to friends and everyone marvelling at my mystical powers. But the instructions were long and complicated. "I'll just do it by intuition," I said. "After all, how hard can it be?" The hubris. I can't bear it. So the following weekend, Steve and I went away to a cottage with our daughter Eva, 6, and 4-year-old George. One evening, friends came to join us, and as we settled in the living room with a bottle of wine, I seized the moment. "Car keys in the bowl, everyone." No, I reached into my bag and whipped out the tarot cards. "Ta-da!" I said. "I'm going to predict." "Ta-da!" I said. "I'm going to predict your futures." I started laying out the cards. "Do you know how to do this?" my friend Jess asked. "Not really," I replied, "but it'll be fun, won't it? Who's first?" I bet they're used to Sian acting like this when she's had a few wines. One by one, I picked cards for everyone and read their meanings from the booklet. Then halfway through, Jess's husband, Kieran, suddenly shouted, "Hey, what's happening to my trousers?" "Oh, good grief, control yourself, Kieran." One of his legs had ripped in half, one of his trouser legs had ripped in half while he was just sitting there. When it was time for Kieran's reading, I pulled out a card and consulted my booklet. "The Hanged Man," I read. "One leg is out." Everyone looked at his ripped trousers and laughed. One leg is out. What does that mean? Oh, right. So one leg is tied to a tree and the other's free. Okay, right. So that's what that means. So yeah, Jess said, maybe you do have the gift after all. That night I tossed the tarot cards onto the sideboard and went to bed. Back at work, I told everyone my tarot story. My colleague Joe asked, "Did you cleanse your box first?" Bit personal, Joe. "Do we have to get HR involved again?" No, he said. No, I said. No, he said. You're supposed to cleanse the pack so there's no negative energy." It's too late now, I said, "but I'm sure it'll be fine." A few days later, we were sitting in our family car at a petrol station when I saw a blue car reversing towards us, and it wasn't stopping. "Steve," I said, "I think she's going to..." There was a loud bang as the car hit us. I turned to the children in the back and asked, "Is everyone okay?" Eva was crying from the shock, but thankfully they were both unharmed. The next day I took them to the park to cheer them up. Before long they were happily playing, the accident forgotten. Suddenly I heard a cry. George was lying in the wood chip holding his foot. He'd fallen off the climbing frame. He couldn't stand up, so I took him to the walking centre. Bit cruel. To him it was a can't walk in station. As we sat there for 4 hours, I felt a familiar pain. It is boring in the hospital, isn't it? No, it was a familiar pain. The plastic chair was triggering my chronic pelvic condition. Oh no. It turned out that George had sprained the top of his foot, but as I carried him out of the hospital, I felt a sharp pain shoot through my lower half. My pelvis had given out. The next day I was in too much pain to go into work, so I had to join a meeting online instead. Joe appeared on the screen and asked, "Did you have a nice weekend?" "Well," I said, "someone crashed into the car, George sprained his foot, and my pelvis is gone, so I can't walk." Joe gasped. "Maybe it's the cards," he said. "You've had nothing but bad luck since those." I dismissed the situation. How could a pack of discounted cards from the supermarket affect my life? I didn't even know how to use them. "Don't worry," Joe told me. "They say bad luck comes in threes." I hope so. I'd had 3 disasters already, and I wasn't in the mood for another. As the week passed, George and I began to heal, and we all looked forward to our upcoming trip to the Harry Potter studios. Then 2 days before, a vomiting bug hit the house. Only Eva was unaffected. On the big day we all felt awful, but dragged ourselves out, exhausted. As we walked inside and joined the front of the crowd, waiting excitedly outside Hogwarts, I perked up. The orchestral music swelled, and the doors were pushed open to reveal the great hall. The crowd gasped in delight, and Eva vomited on the floor. And then everyone else started vomiting until the whole great hall was awash with sick. And we ran back to the car, Eva still vomiting violently into a plastic bag. I'm sorry. It's so good. Next weekend, I made a roast dinner. This has really tickled me, I don't know why. I cooked some roast potatoes until they were nice and crispy. Then I put the red hot glass tray on it. There's a picture of her hand. I put the red hot glass tray on the rack next to the sink. And it slid and fell. And instinctively I reached out to catch it. And pain seared through my hand. I'm sorry, I've really got the giggles. Pain seared through my hand, and I dropped the tray. But it was too late. It had already melted the skin off my fingers. Sorry, everybody. Oh dear. Oh, sorry. I went to A&E with my hand in a pail of water and was treated for second degree. I was treated for second degree burns. Come on, compose yourself. I was treated for second degree burns. This is terrible. The following day at work, Joe looked at my bandaged hand. He opened his mouth, and I said, Don't! The coming weeks were chaos. The car failed its MOT. A gust of wind blew the glass out of our hallway door. The washing machine broke, and I had to clean out clothes in the bath with my one good hand. So much for bad luck coming in threes. Days later, I was in the kitchen making a cuppa when I felt something drip on my head. I looked up and saw water pouring through the ceiling. As I called for an emergency plumber, I thought of Joe's words. Maybe it's the cards. Was he right? I recalled the way I'd messed around with them. I hadn't respected them. I'd used them for entertainment purposes. Well, suddenly it didn't feel so funny anymore. Days passed. Our car was vandalised. Steve's vasectomy was botched and he ended up losing his penis. And even our black cat, who was usually affectionate, refused to come near me. Then, the final straw. We were all playing in the garden when a thorn got stuck in George's foot. Bloody hell. He was screaming in pain, but it was too deep to remove. After multiple hospital trips, even doctors couldn't remove it. His foot swelled to the size of an elephant's foot, and he couldn't walk. One morning he was on the sofa when, all of a sudden, yellow pus oozed out, along with a thorn the size of my thumbnail. Sorry, listeners. All this vomit and pus, it's disgusting. I'd had enough. I got out my phone and Googled ways to cleanse tarot cards. I had to try. Minutes later, I'd found a solution. Moonlight, I said. That's it. That evening, I took the cards out into the garden and laid them on the grass. The moon hung low in the sky, and I prayed it would somehow work its magic. The next day, George got out of bed and walked across the hallway, normally, on both feet. And when we went downstairs for breakfast, the cat rubbed against my legs for the first time in months. Best of all, days passed without another disaster. I hope that's the end of it. Me too, Sean. For God's sake, the story's been going on for ages. I've learned my lesson when it comes to messing with things I don't understand. I'll never touch those tarot cards again. Well, I should think not, Sean, you silly goose. Okay, now this is where I always feel like I push my luck on these because we've had 3 goodish ones, haven't we? And now I'm going to pick another one, and it's often rubbish. But we'll see what we can do with it. It's called A Ghostly Uprising. Okay. And it's from Jack Hutchinson. Ooh, a baby, aged 28. I've never been beaten by spirit until I stumbled on a house of horror. Had I finally met my match? Okay, well, let's see, Jack, shall we? Yawning, I logged off my laptop and was about to go to bed when my phone rang. Hello, I said. Hello, I said. Jack Hutchinson, paranormal investigator. There was a pause. Then a woman replied shakily. Shakily? Oh, hello. Are you the medium, Jack Hutchinson? Well, I wouldn't say I'm a medium, darling, but how can I help? She paused again, obviously on some kind of unlimited minutes contract. My name's Charmaine, she said. She said, I think my cottage could be haunted, and you might be able to help. I think my cottage could be haunted, and you might be able to help. I think my cottage could be haunted, and you might be able to help. Since childhood, I'd been communicating with spirits, and now I had my own business as a paranormal investigator. Sorry to hear you going through this, my lovely. How long have you lived at the property, if you don't mind my asking? I just bought it, she said. It's an old railhouse dating back to 1800s. The place were in a right state. Bare walls, no electricity. Well, I can see why you bought it, Charmaine. I was planning to do it all up, but Charmaine took a deep intake of breath. Things started happening. Oh, okay. What sort of things, darling? I asked, cracking my Lenovo back open and starting to type away. Well, it began with these terrible, rancid smells, and there were flies everywhere. Then last week, something really weird happened. I had a glass bottle on the coffee table, and it just exploded into pieces right in front of me. Crikey, I said, my fingers pounding away. It sounds like you've got a poltergeist, dear. I suggest I bring my crew round there tomorrow, darling, and we'll have a top-to-bottom sweep. Thank you so much, Charmaine said. heaving a sigh of relief. The following afternoon I drove to her home in Mansfield with my partner Jack and our 2 other crew members, James and Janet. So, wait, we've got Jack, James and Janet in this company. Incredible. It was a beautiful sunny day, but as we arrived in Mansfield, the mood quickly changed. Well, having been to Mansfield myself, that's not really surprising. Located near some old railway lines, the cottage was dark and dingy, with boarded-up windows, and the garden was a mess of encroaching weeds and scrap metal. I mean, again, if you've ever been to Mansfield. "Ready?" I said, turning to the group. They all nodded. Before going inside, I placed a hand on the brick wall and shuddered. The residual energy was thick with decades of pain and despair. I'd never experienced such a strong reaction to a property. Taking a deep breath, I pressed the bell. As the door slowly opened, we were hit by the most unbearable smell, like death. Again, Mansfield. Apologies if you come from Mansfield, by the way. No, I really am sorry for you. "Hi, Charmaine," I spluttered, addressing the dark-haired lady in the doorway. She looked terrified, her face ashen and bags like bruises under her eyes. Inside, the foreboding air grew more stifling, and the temperature had also plummeted. "Please come through," Charmaine said. Cautiously, we followed her into the front room. It was stark. Cobwebs hung from the crumbling ceiling. Every surface was obscured by dust, and the only furniture was a rickety chair and coffee table. "Oh, I love what you've done with this place, Charmaine," I said. I'm sorry about lack of seating," she said, looking down at the bare floorboards. "Don't worry, dearie," I smiled. "I don't mind it standing up. You can sit there." As she did so, she picked up a half-finished cup of tea, took a sip and placed it back on the table. "Oh, God, not again," she murmured. Our mouths fell open. The tea had frozen to ice. "It's been doing that ever since I started living here."
Then maybe you shouldn't be living here!
After an initial chat, we began our tour of each room to search for spirits. I led the way, and within minutes, images were flashing before my eyes. I felt sick and grabbed hold of Jack, panting. "Oh, I can see a woman being stabbed." Next, we climbed the creaking stairs. "Anything else?" Janet asked, breathlessly, scribbling notes. In the bedroom, I had another flash. "Oh, robbery," I said. "I can see thieves ransacking the place." During the rest of the tour, I heard gunshots and saw many more gruesome apparitions of victims. But the one that shook me the most was the ghost back in the front room. It was a man hanging himself. I heard the creak of the rope, and to my horror, the neck break. "Hung man!" I called to Janet. "Write that down. Hung man!" "We need to perform a séance," I said at last. To begin, we stood round the see-through table we'd brought along with us. "Everyone needs to picture a glowing white light to protect you," I said. Once we were all ready, I closed my eyes and entered into a deep trance to make contact. Immediately, everything went deathly silent, and the temperature dropped even further, to the point where we could see our own breath. Before I knew it, powerful energies were flooding up and into me. It reminded me of a long weekend I'd spent in Sitges a few years ago. No, I willed the spirits to communicate, either by speaking out loud, talking through me, or through the table by a tapping and a banging. And in response, the floor began to vibrate. Then things took a sudden turn. Just then, I felt myself being lifted off the ground. Everyone gasped. This had never happened before. At that moment, the man I'd seen hanging himself appeared in the corner. He was wearing an old policeman's uniform, and his face was twisted in a grimace. "Who are you?" I asked, my feet still off the ground.
"Peter,"
he snapped.
"I used to live in cottage
during early 1900s, working as police officer on railway network. Why did you take your own life, Policeman Peter? I demanded. His face hardened. Because I stabbed my wife to death, he said simply. I couldn't live with the guilt. I couldn't live with guilt. Suddenly, Peter disappeared, and a row of both men and women dressed in Victorian clothes materialised. I could feel the intense pain and anger that had trapped them in this cottage for over a century. Clearly, these were the victims of the many violent crimes I'd witnessed during my walk through. Addressing each one in turn, I listened to their stories of torment. They were all consumed by a need for justice and recognition. Summoning every ounce of my strength, I started reciting the usual words to guide them towards peace and acceptance. I was nearing surrender when I felt myself being gently lowered to the ground. I opened my eyes and looked around. Everyone was pale with fear, but the atmosphere had changed. It wasn't cold anymore, and I could hear traffic and birdsong from outside. It was a portal that had opened, letting those spirits in, I panted. But I think it's closed now. Charmaine was staring at me. You were levitating, she said. Oh, I know, love, I said. How far up did I get? Just a few inches, Jack told me. Oh, story of my life, I said. I can't believe it, Charmaine said. I can't believe it, Charmaine said. Everything you've said matches with what I read about the property and deeds and land registry. I can't thank you enough for helping me. Just then, something caught my eye, an object in the corner where Policeman Peter had stood. I picked it up. It's a policeman's whistle, said Janet, and it looks like it hasn't been blown in many a year. I know the feeling, I said, and we all went on our way. In the following days, we checked in with Charmaine, who told us that the spooky activity had stopped and the foreboding atmosphere had been replaced with calmness. But as for Jack, James, Janet and me, well, we didn't sleep for weeks. And a year on, I still get the willies thinking about my visit to Mansfield. It was the most terrifying experience I've ever had, and one I will never forget. I always like it when they end like that. Oh, I'll never forget the time I was levitated in a room full of ghosts. I mean, no, of course. Well, anyway. That's that then. Sorry, listeners, I've just seen there's a story called A Ghost Touched My Boob, which we'll have to wait till another time because it's getting late now and nurse will soon be coming round with my medication. So listen, I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, click like and subscribe and leave a comment below. And if you didn't enjoy it, well, I don't really want to know. I don't care. More horror stories on the way. And until next time, stay spooky.